So recently in the metal industry, you've heard a lot about tariffs, quotas, imports, domestic products. Today on Q&A Mondays, we're going to talk about everything from Section 232 to other trade cases to steel and aluminum tariffs and more. Welcome back to another Q&A Monday on the Metal Roofing channel. I've got Mike, Blake, and Adam Mazzella back with me today, and we're going to be talking a little bit about steel tariffs, quotas, Section 232, all that kind of hot topic, hot button items right now. But one thing to think about is we're not going to pass judgment on anything. We're not going to take a position. We're just going to present the information that is available to us right now, so that you can stay up to date with what's happening in the industry and maybe a little bit of history about what some of these terms mean and where it comes from. So let's hop right in. We hear a lot about Section 232, tariffs, quotas, other terms like that, relative to the steel industry as well as international trade. So is this a recent controversy or is it more of a long-standing issue?
The issue of steel and trade goes back 50 plus years. And the issue really boils down to the United States steel industry and then, more or less, the rest of the world or developing countries and them unfairly trading steel to the United States. And It's not necessarily them unfairly trading the steel, but, a series of subsidies or things like that may impact them to allow them to sell it to the United States at a lower number than what the United States can compete with.
Okay. So if the United States believes in free trade, what does it mean when we say a foreign country has an unfair advantage?
So it's the United States does believe in free trade by and large, but it's really about fair trade. So, if everything's even, yes, a developing country can probably make steel a little bit cheaper than the United States, but they have massive transportation costs, and somehow it still shows up to the United States dramatically cheaper. That is typically steel that's being subsidized in some way in an effort to get more and more of that foreign steel here and less of the domestic steel purchased here in the United States.
Right. So if it's more about fair trade, then what are some examples of unfair trade?
So, for example, could be subsidizing wages, unfair tax advantages, various things that would be not competing fairly with the United States.
Okay.
Yeah, they could be, having them produce more steel than what there's a demand for. So if you're producing more than there's a demand for, that price is going to tumble until somebody finally consumes that good. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of basic economics of scale with that.
Right, okay. So when it comes to the United States, what is the U.S.'s policy when it comes to unfair advantage in trade?
Well, there are many trade cases that are available, and today we'll probably talk about 5 different ones. There's anti-dumping, there's countervailing, there's Section 201, there's Section 301, there's the Section 232, and all of those have a different meaning, and generally they're covered by the ITC and the Department of Commerce. They guide the rules and regulations.
So let's talk about those 5. Let's start with anti-dumping. What's the anti-dumping case?
Well, anti-dumping is when a country sells below their cost or they sell below they're selling in their home market. And generally, that's a tariff is imposed upon the country if that's done. There's a very analytical approach to what those numbers are, and they usually last for about 5 years, the tariffs.
How about countervailing or subsidy case?
Yeah, in that case, foreign countries are subsidizing the companies in terms of taxes or other reasons which would unfairly disadvantage the United States. And over the last 50 years, there's been many anti-dumping and countervailing. And recently, China had a tariff of 500%, India was 30%, and there were other nations that were less than that recently implemented.
So the third trade case we're going to talk about is Section 201. What is that?
Now, that's when imports from all countries are causing financial harm on a domestic industry. And in that case, the 201 would be enacted, then all imports from any country would not be allowed. And back in 2002, the steel industry did have this 201
Okay.
that was put in place. And for a year and a half, no imports for steel were allowed in to help to allow the domestic steel industry to get back on their feet, get out of bankruptcy, and back in business.
So what about Section 301? What is that?
Well, 301 is when a foreign country violates an existing trade agreement. And this gives the president the authority to enact tariffs. And if he deems necessary, he gets guidance from the International Trade Commission and the Department of Commerce. And there's a lot of news about that today, but none of that really has to do with the steel industry.
Okay. So this last one has been generating a lot of news recently. So Section 232, what is that and what's kind of happening right now?
Well, Section 232 was give the authority of the president to protect the national security. If there's any harm to national security, he has the ability to take steps to do that. And this was implemented in 2018, where steel has now got a tariff of 25% and aluminum has a 10%. And the president indicated that really national security is tied to economic security. And his position was good jobs, a strong domestic steel industry is what was needed to support national security. There's been a lot of discussion about whether that's right or wrong, but the fact of the matter is that's the way it is today. And that was enacted, the 25% for steel and 10% for aluminum.
So with these trade actions, what's kind of the short-term impact that we've seen or may see in the future?
Well, short term, we've seen a dramatic increase in the price of steel, and mostly in our world, the flat rolled world, that encompasses hot rolled, cold rolled, and then coated products, galvalume, galvanized. We mainly deal with galvalume, but they all kind of derive from that product. Dramatic increases, and the other things that it's done, and mostly in other products that capacity may be limited, is that it's made it sometimes harder to source. So thus it's continued to drive the price up more and more. And long term, it's really uncertain.
So there's a lot of information to digest. And at Sheffield Metals, we're dedicated to providing the most recent information. If you have any questions, comment down below. We'd love to hear them. We'd love to answer some more questions in the future. Subscribe to the Metal Roofing channel to stay in the loop for new videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.